Hello again, and welcome to our continuing look at A.K. Warder's Essential Grammar Guide, An Introduction to Pali. And this week we begin Lesson 5, on pages 28 through 34. Warder packs an extraordinary amount into these few pages, and jumps around quite a bit, so let's get on with it. This is Pali Studies on the Learn Pali channel. In Lesson 5, Warder begins to look at pronouns. There are many different types of pronoun, and we begin by looking at two. Personal pronouns, words like I, you, he, she, it, and demonstrative pronouns, words like this, that, these and those. So let's start with personal pronouns first. A pronoun is simply a word which substitutes for another noun or phrase. So if we said, the boy sees the monk, he goes to him, the words he and him are both pronouns. They simply replace and then represent that thing. So we can think of them as pointing, either pointing back to something already mentioned, as here the word he points back to the boy and him points back to the monk. And Warder labels this with the technical term anaphoric, which simply means to refer back to something or someone previously mentioned. And just to throw a bit more jargon in, the thing referred to is called the antecedent, which literally means to come before. And as well as pointing back to something previously mentioned, a pronoun can point to something physically present to the listener, as in, him over there. Now note that the term personal here refers to grammatical person, as in first, second or third person like with verbs. And we've actually seen grammatical person in a previous video. But briefly, the first person refers to the person who's actually speaking, I. And the second person is the one listening, or who is being addressed, you. And the third person is literally everything else, other people, places, things and ideas, anything not identified as the speaker or the listener. So if we now return to our example, we can see that both the boy and the monk are third person, neither you or I. But we can see that although they're both third person, they have different forms. So as well as grammatical person, personal pronouns have a subjective form, which is used when replacing the subject of the verb, and, you've guessed it, we use an objective form when the pronoun replaces a verbal object. And if we now place these English personal pronouns into a table, we can see that the first and second person forms are genderless, whereas the third person takes different forms for male, female, and neuter, at least in the singular. And this may seem obvious, but the pronoun takes the same gender and number, either singular or plural, as the thing to which they refer. Now the good news is that personal pronouns in Pali have similar characteristics to those of English. So now if we look at the Pali personal pronouns, again we can see that the first and second person are genderless, whereas the third person has both male, female and neuter forms. And it should come as no surprise to find that in Pali the subject is in the nominative case, whereas the object, or more specifically the pronoun of the direct object, is in accusative case. Now there's one slight difference between English and Pali, and that is in English the gender of the pronoun matches the biological gender of the referent, boy, girl or genderless, whereas in Pali the gender of the pronoun matches the grammatical gender of the word referred to, which is often merely just based on the sound with which the word ends, rather than on its meaning. So if we take the example, the man crosses the river, here Nadi, the river, is actually a feminine noun, and so if we represent it with a pronoun, we take the feminine form, and not the neuter as it would be in English. And also remember that in Pali subject pronouns aren't as frequent as they are in English. Although all verbs require a subject, in Pali this can be merely implied by the personal ending of the verb, and so a separate subject pronoun becomes redundant. and when it is included, this is usually done for emphasis, placing stress on that subject. So let's now turn to demonstratives. In English, demonstrative pronouns are the words this and that, and in the plural, these and those. For instance, this is my pen, these are good books. So in English, demonstrative pronouns are both genderless and take the same form whether they're pointed to male, female, or neuter objects. And we can use both this and that as either the subject or the object of a verb. I like this, this is good. And in English we use this and that pretty much interchangeably. But there is one small difference, and that is we tend to use the pronoun this when referring to something which is present or nearby, and we tend to use that to refer to something which is absent or remote, either physically or in time. And actually the same is true for personal pronouns. Obviously the first and second person pronouns, the speaker and the audience, refer to people who are present. But third person pronouns, he, she and it, can refer to something present or to someone or something absent but part of the discussion. And this idea of proximity to the speaker becomes more important as we look at demonstratives in Pali. Demonstrative pronouns in Pali are actually quite different from those of English, and that's because the third-person personal pronouns that we've just seen are also used as demonstratives in Pali. Yes, just let that register. As well as he, she and it, third-person personal pronouns can also mean this or that, in which case they take the same gender and number as the thing to which they refer. Also, these third-person pronouns all derive from one stem, that is, they are declined forms from the stem ta. But there are other pronoun stems, and worded details another two. Eta, which takes exactly the same forms as ta, but with an e sound in front, and ima, and these stems each decline for the three genders as well as by case and number. Now you might ask, why are there so many pronoun forms? Well, in Pali, pronouns tend to distinguish proximity. So pronouns from the stem ta tend to describe someone or something that is absent or distant in either space or time, whereas pronouns from the stem eta or ima often refer to someone or something which is present, close at hand or obvious to the audience. And Warder tends to label these with the technical term deittic, which actually means obvious to the listener. So we can infer from this that pronouns which come from ta correspond more with the English word that, while pronouns from the stem eta and ima correspond more to the English word this. But it's also important to recognise that, like English, the distinction isn't firm. The meaning of this and that often overlap, and can be used interchangeably, and the same is true with Pali pronouns too. The important thing here to remember is that pronouns take their gender and number from the thing to which they refer, while their case comes from how they are used in the sentence, nominative for the subject and accusative for the object. Finally, demonstratives can also function as adjectives. So where a pronoun replaces a noun, an adjective is used to qualify a noun. For instance, that man crossed this river. Here the terms this and that are actually qualifying which man and which river. And when acting like this, technically they're termed demonstrative adjectives, as they aren't really pronouns because they don't replace a subject or an object, but instead are qualifying another noun. And like any adjective in Pali, they match the noun that they qualify in both case, gender and number. Demonstrative adjectives become demonstrative pronouns when they replace the nouns that they point to. Okay, so that gives you a little bit more information about personal and demonstrative pronouns. It's also worth pointing out that the third-person pronouns so and sa can be used merely to add emphasis. And occasionally, in a similar manner, the nominative is used where English would use the definite article, the. Well, as you can see, pronoun forms are quite irregular, and you should learn to recognise them. But there are literally hundreds. And what's more, the Pali English Dictionary isn't of much use if you're trying to look up a declined form. So to help you, I've put together an A to Z list of all the declined pronoun forms as well as some adverbs, and there's a link in the description below. Okay, moving on. Next, Warder introduces us to a new verb, from the root as, which means to be. Back in lesson 1, if you remember, we looked at the verb bhavati and hoti, which both also mean to be. And we saw that the verb hoti tends to be copulative, linking qualities to nouns, where English would use a form of is, whilst bhavati tends towards being or becoming, though they both greatly overlap, as essentially they are both the same verb, who being a contracted form of bu. But the verb root us tends to be a little different, in that it expresses the existential meaning of to be, affirming the existence of something. And this is especially true of the third person. So, ati means he, she or it exists, and this can often be rendered in English by there is. For instance, brahmano ati means there is a Brahmin. And it's important to understand that in the third person it can never mean he is a Brahmin, which would be the case with hoti. That said, the first and second person forms are often copulative like hoti and bhavati. And one thing to watch out for with this verb is that the initial vowel is often elided or dropped, and then the verb becomes conjoined to its preceding noun. And while we're on the subject, let's skip next to the section on the verb vach, to say, which is vachati in the third person present. Here Warder gives us the aorist inflections, which are quite irregular. And there are actually two stem forms here, avocha and avacha. So avocha means he said, etc. And it's very common for this verb to appear with the pronoun etad, meaning he said this. So for instance, Ananda said this to the Blessed One. Okay. Going back now to look at the section on negation, there are two common ways to negate a sentence or a verb, and that is with the particles na and ma, which are both indeclinable. To render these in English, we simply place not or does not in front of the verb. Now the particle na often fuses with verbs which begin with vowels. For instance, na ati becomes nati, meaning does not exist or there is not. Sometimes you'll find the verb at the beginning of the sentence in order to add emphasis. So for instance, nati mago is literally the path does not exist or there is no path. But these negative particles don't have to appear close to the verb. Often the particle is at the beginning of the sentence whilst the verb remains at the end. And quite frequently they're accompanied by emphatic particles which merely add emphasis, like certainly or indeed. And the particle na will often fuse with these two if they begin with a vowel. The particle ma has a special meaning. It's used mainly with aorist verbs to create injunctions or prohibitions. And in that case, the aorist inflection loses the implication of past time to become just a request which is set in either the present or the future. And these are often in the second person with an implied you don't. Sometimes they're in the third person, in which case the prohibition means may he not or let it not. Finally, a double negation, where there are two negative particles in the same sentence, implies a strong positive affirmation. So if we take Warder's example, here the verb is karesi, an aorist form of kar, meaning to do. And kumaro means literally the boy, and this can be a euphemism for a prince, whilst rajang means something like sovereignty. So a rough translation would be, do not indeed let the prince not govern. And the double negative becomes a strong affirmation, meaning let him govern, or he must rule. And this then brings us to the last section of Lesson 5, where Warder introduces a whole new case, the vocative case. This is actually a very simple declension form, often taking just the bare noun stem without any modification in the singular. In fact, I already gave you the vocative of the noun loka back in Lesson 1 when we looked at the nominative case. This declension case is used to mark the person being addressed. So you'll often find that proper names or names of groups of people are in the vocative, whilst pronouns, for instance, have no vocative case forms. Notably, the vocative word never comes first in the sentence, but often comes second. So if we take an example, Mardeva Paridevasi, this means, O king, do not grieve, with the injunction not to grieve addressed to the king. Well, there you have Lesson 5, a bit of a mixed bag. I hope you're getting along with the exercises. The answers to last week's exercise can be found by going to the Wisdom and Wonders page, a link to which is down in the description below. And there's also a link to a guide on how to use the dictionary. And next week, in Lesson 6, we'll begin to explore the moods of the present tense in Pali, with a look at the imperative inflection. And of course, in the meantime, there are more tutorials on the grammar of the Pali language, and also my blog.